Miss Cryshaunda Crawford here, and we're interviewing her for Child Abuse Awareness Month, which is this month, April. Could you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Well, I'm Cryshaunda Crawford. I'm a resident right now of Guilford County, of course, and been here probably most of my life. So.
Okay, Cryshaunda, so can you explain to our viewers your experience with child abuse?
Yeah, I am a mother, of course, at the time. I'm a teen mom, and I had, at the age of 18, I had 2 children. So my oldest daughter and my son. At a young age, of course, I had my ways and was kind of a little bit and I decided to move out of the state of North Carolina and move to Florida. I was in love. I thought I loved the person, and I thought I could start a new life out there. And so I took myself and my 2 children to this place I've never been to before, and things were going wonderful. He had a job, I had a job. Things were just flowing good for us for a couple of months. And then one day, I was at work and I got a phone call that I needed to rush home because my son wasn't breathing. And so at the time I worked across the street, so I came home and I came into seeing my son just lying there, barely breathing.
Wow.
Mind you, a few days prior, the guy that I was dating at the time stated that he had fallen off of a chair and hit his head because he had a bruise on his head. And days prior, I took him to the emergency room and asked them to take a look at him because of what I was told. He was feverish and he just wouldn't eat. And so they didn't run the necessary tests, but 5 days later, this is when my son goes into a coma. And so he's rushed to the hospital in the city of Winter Haven, Florida, and they couldn't find nothing wrong with him. They couldn't find the answer. He wasn't responding, he wasn't waking up, barely breathing, and eventually he was flown to Tampa, Florida, which is a children's hospital out there. And when they had the opportunity to run quite a few tests, they come to realize that he had suffered from a fractured skull on the right side and a blow to the back of the brain.
Wow.
And so he was left in a coma for a couple of weeks, and not knowing, I'm at all, I'm wondering, what's happening, what's going on. That's when they were able to tell me. They started to question, what was my household like? Was my boyfriend abusive towards me? And he wasn't. And so they come to realize, of course, that he being abused, we had to take the next steps into finding out answers of how he came to that situation. So, but for a while he was just there in a coma, and eventually we were able to get him from Tampa to North Carolina, which I was able to get him into a facility here in the city of Winston-Salem called Children's Home, and he was able to get the proper care until I was able to bring him home with me. So it was kind of rough with dealing with the fact of a child who was born perfectly healthy, and at the age of 8 months go from being perfectly healthy to being totally dependent beyond the idea of an 8-month-old child. So it was a rough journey.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. And were there any signs that you think you missed during your experience with child abuse?
As I look back, I was 19 years old with 2 children, and as a mother, you're responsible for your kids, and you are responsible for whatever position you put them in. And so you kind of race back on, what did I miss? What, did I not see this? And as time went by, I looked back and I noticed, I said, there were signs where he truly did not like my son. I'm just assuming that's what the case, because there were jokes that he would make because he was a mama's boy. I mean, he was a little boy who wanted his mom all the time. And I mean, if I had to go to the bathroom, he was there. He wanted to be with me. But the gentleman, the man that is the one that afflicted the abuse, had an issue with the bond. And so he would make little jokes every now and then. And as I look back over time, I look at those now as signs of that he didn't like them. Maybe he wasn't playing when he was making those statements. Maybe he really was serious about not really liking or loving my son. He never did my daughter. And I was one of those mothers at the time who had a child by a person who did not want to own up to
Yeah.
responsibility. So in a sense, it left my son fatherless. My daughter had a father. He was known. And so I'm thinking in my mind that he looked at my son as opportunity, but not putting his hands, because of not, you know how it is sometimes, you're thinking like, you know, I'm not going to suffer the repercussions. And my oldest daughter, Danielle, was able to speak. So if anything happened to her, she could tell. But unfortunately, my son wasn't able to.
Too young.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could have done anything differently, what do you think you would have done?
I would have not went. You know, I look back and I think after a few years, this happened. He passed away in the year of 1999. So this abuse happened in 1997. And when I look back, you know, one of the primary things I could think of is I just wouldn't have went. Or even if I did go, I would have listened to my children more. And even though he was a child at 8 months, maybe I should have acknowledged signs, you know, maybe I should have observed the relationship between the two. And as a 19-year-old and as a mother, you don't think a baby, an arm baby or a hip baby can show you whether or not they like someone. You know, a lot of kids do that. You don't know if they like them or dislike them. It's just the way they are. But, you know, if one thing I could change, I would definitely change making that decision on hopping on that Greyhound and going all the way to Florida to be with someone. To this day, you know, my son would be here if I didn't do that.
Okay. And what advice would you give parents who suspect child abuse?
I think that you got to keep your eyes open. One thing after that, I was very I was cautious. I was not paranoid, but overprotective. So, you know, I was always observing behaviors, how parents, and sometimes when I even look at parents and how they speak to their children, harsh language, how they communicate, it always triggers something for me, because I believe, you know, there's no need to be that angry with a child, because children over time, you know, they are growing into their own. They make mistakes. They're not perfect. It is our responsibility to mold them into who they're supposed to be. And in the process of being the molder, we got to understand that there are going to be some rough times. But I would just tell, especially, I think one of my primary messages is for teen moms or young moms who are anxious to have a boyfriend or anxious to be in a relationship with someone, and you already have children. I think that you need to observe that person with your children. I'm happily married now, and I've been married now for, you know, almost 18 years, and I was blessed to have another daughter who was 16 and a son at 11 years old. But one thing that I observed with my husband when we were dating was his relationship with my daughter. I needed to know that she loved him. I needed to see that there was a bond there before I was able to move forward. And even when I had my children with my husband, and I remember when he first punished them or tried to punish or get on them, you know, spank the children, whatever the case, you know, get on them. It bothered me for a second. I had to tell myself, okay, these are his kids too. You know, and he has never showed anything, you know, he's a wonderful man. But it was just something that was still in me that, you know, had this thing to protect. So I would just tell women to protect your babies, protect your kids, listen to your children. If there's an issue that they are having with someone, or they're not liking the person you're dating or who you're with, listen to that voice. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there's more to it than what you realize.
Thank you for that. So what advice would you give parents who, like you, have experienced child abuse?
It took a long time for me to be where I am, and that is in a position of forgiveness, where I went through depression, I went through wanting to be isolated, I went through trying to find something to fill the void after my son passed away in 1999 from, He lived for 3 years after the abuse, but he was left as a quadriplegic, epilepsy, feeding tube, he couldn't do things. His mind at the age of 3 was at a 5-month-old.
Wow.
And I was his caretaker as well as his mother. And losing him left me in an empty state. I felt I had no purpose. I felt like there was nothing left for me to do, even though I had another child. It just pulled so much out of me that I didn't know what I was going to do. And so, people can say that, I had a right to hang on to my anger, my hatred, my desire for vengeance. And what I had to do was eventually over the years find a place of forgiveness. And I had to forgive the individual who abused my son. It was hard. And I think that when parents are in the position that I am in, they have to find ways to pull their energy away from the abuser and put it towards what you have left. I made a vow that my son needed all of me and not part of me.
That's good.
And my life after his death, I needed 100% of it. And the man that did it did not deserve any bit of my emotions, whether it was hatred, whether it was dislike. He just didn't deserve it. And so I had to find a way to move forward.
Okay. Now, what would you say was the way you coped or healed to manage the traumas that you did experience?
Well, in the beginning, my first way of managing it was drinking and seeing guys left and right. This is something I've told my daughter, so it's not like it's a secret. I found ways to try to drown myself. And the problem is you wake up the next morning and the problem is still there. And sometimes the pain is still there, worse than it was before you went to sleep. I personally, my peace was spiritual. And I know that we're not on a faith base, but that was where I found my strength. And a way to live and the way to move forward. And so, I think that is important. If anyone is going through this, they have to find something that they can latch on, that can help ease them, can take them through. It's a journey and it takes time.
Understand. Okay, so did you obtain any services such as therapy or victim advocacy services from any local organizations?
Well, at the time, and this is one thing, and I'm so glad that you're doing this, because when my son's been gone for 22 years, about 20 years ago when he passed, while he was alive, I had great services. I had occupational therapists coming to the home. I had physical therapists. I had speech therapists. The government blessed me with therapy toys, tools, wheelchairs, food. I mean, I was so blessed with things that I needed when he was here. It was just overwhelming. But unfortunately, when he passed, either they were there and I didn't reach out, or they didn't reach out. But I had to find my own way to really cope with the loss. And it was like about a 4-year journey I went on, a roller coaster up and down. I know they may have been, but I don't think it's loud enough. I don't think it's loud enough out there to reach out to people like myself.
Yeah, and that's honestly what we do here and with our community outreach team. Our purpose is to make it known and knowledgeable that our services are here and they're absolutely free. So thank you for being here today and explaining, your story and everything for Child Abuse Awareness Month. So lastly, is there anything else you would like to share today?
I would say that, child abuse is real. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's verbal, there's neglect. There's so many different levels of abuse. It's real. And I think that this is something not only in the month of April, I've always acknowledged April. Every year since my son has passed away as Child Abuse Awareness Month. But I believe that we all should be aware of this regardless of what month it is. It's not until you see it on social media or the news and it talks about a sad story of a 2 or 3-year-old child died by the hands of someone. And the emotions overtake you for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But then we find ourselves scrolling up on Facebook and changing the channels on television, and it's out of sight and it's out of mind. It's not that people don't care, but I think that we need to be louder. I think if we are proactive, we don't have to react to the abuse.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for participating in this interview, and we wish you well and much success.
Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.